Hi, everybody. Oh, I appreciate you all being here. Thanks so much for coming. Hi, Spring fans. I'm super happy you're here. Thanks a lot. We have very little time. This is a unique opportunity. They asked me to give this talk a few days ago, and I was like, yes, that's super cool. So we're going to go through basically a kind of a rehash of an old Spring tip I did. How many of you have ever had the dubious pleasure of watching Spring tips? Oh, you poor schlubs. So the Spring tips is just these videos I do. Every Wednesday, I do a new video on just some corner of the Spring ecosystem that I wouldn't normally otherwise bother trying to get a whole conference talk accepted for. But it's interesting. It's just stuff that like you could get a whole talk on, but it's very focused, you know. So I do these Spring tips on dashboards, different types of dashboards for your microservices, or different Spring retry and Hystrix for the circuit breakers, or whatever. It's just new stuff. We just did one on Spring Cloud Gateway, for example, last week. That was out, and just this week we have Spring Tool Suite 4. It's not GA yet. It's just early, live, hot takes on some of the new stuff that's happening in our ecosystem. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to be here and talk about a decidedly small sort of feature, but I'm really, really excited. It's really kind of convenient. So with that in mind, I encourage you to check out this GitHub repository. You'll find the code for that as well. And I've also got another repository, github.com, Josh Long, and it says like S1P 2017, Spring Tips, something like that. A little bit about me. How many of you know, how many of you have ever had the dubious pleasure of seeing one of my talks before? I'm just curious. No refunds for the rest of you, just so you know. It's very important to get that out of the way right now. My name is Josh Long. I'm a Spring developer advocate on the Spring team. I'm an open source engineer and contributor. I have the dubious distinction of being the #1 most highly lauded, most prolific, most visible, most highly acclaimed contributor of bugs, but still, number one contributor to those projects to which I'm a party, right? I've got something. That's not much, but it's something. I'm an open source and a developer advocate. I work on the Spring team trying to help people build better software in terms of Spring and the open source ecosystem that surrounds it. And as part of that, I write books and do training videos. So I just finished a book. I just finished a video called Spring Boot, Building Microservices with Spring Boot Live Lessons with my friend, the one, the only, the amazing, the inimitable Phil Webb, Spring Boot co-founder Phil Webb. And I just finished my 5th book with my friend Kenny Bastani. This book is called Cloud Native Java. How many of you have ever heard of it? Cloud Native Java. The rest of you, if you haven't, you should absolutely try it. It's the reason it's so good is because we spent a long time trying to get this book out and ready for consumption. It took us 2 extra years to get this book ready, and the reason is because of the animal on the cover. You see, anybody who knows anything about O'Reilly books knows that it doesn't matter what you put in the cover, in between the covers. It's all about the choice of animal on the cover itself. We spent a long time trying to get this right. This bird is a blue-eared kingfisher. Blue ears, kingfisher. It's a bird that is indigenous to the Indonesian Java Islands. It's a bird that is native to the Java Islands. And it's a bird, and birds fly through the clouds. Yes, exactly. It's a bird that flies through the clouds that is indigenous or native to Java. It's a cloud native Java bird. Never mind. It'll come. It'll come. So there's that. And today, my friends, we're going to talk about functional bean definitions and registration, right? So let me clean up my little workspace here. Goodbye to that. Goodbye to that. Goodbye to that. Goodbye to this. That. Downloads. All right. So we're going to talk about functional bean definition. We're going to build a new project here at start.spring.io. How many of you know start.spring.io? This is my second favorite place on the internet after, of course, production. My first favorite place on the internet is production. I love production. You should love production. You should go as early and often as possible. You should bring the kids, bring the family, bring your loved ones. It's the happiest place. Amazing. It's the best place ever. But if you're not already there, then you should begin your journey here at start.spring.io. If you want for inspiration in the morning before a cup of tea or coffee, start.spring.io. If your children are restless and can't sleep, start.spring.io. And if you suffer from indigestion after a long night of alcohol abuse and PHP, start.spring.io. So we're going to build today to demonstrate the concepts of functional or programmatic bean definition and registration. In order to contextualize that feature, we need to kind of look at what's happened before. Yes? Uh-oh. dropping out. Paulo? Hello? Is that live? All right, thanks. So in order to contextualize that, in order to demonstrate it, we're going to go ahead and build an application here. And we're going to call this Beans because, you know, why not? And we're going to take advantage of, this is a feature that's new in Spring Framework 5, which of course was just released in September. So we're going to bring in Spring Framework 5 and by bringing in Spring Boot 2.0, which will be due either this month or early next month, very soon, either way, right? And I don't want to demonstrate too much. I'm not going to focus too much on the reactive web stuff, but I do want to have it as an example. So I'm going to build a reactive web application that talks to reactive MongoDB, or actually I want to have something to inject, so I'm going to use reactive MongoDB. I'll use Lombok as well, and I'm going to use Kotlin. Now, you know, part of this talk is going to be in Java, part of it will be in Kotlin, but if I have a Kotlin project, it's easy to have Java in there. You know, that's why I'm starting with that. So we're going to go ahead and hit generate. That'll give us a new project, and I'll open this project up in my IDE, and it doesn't really matter what IDE you're using. Anything is just fine. These days, anything that has good support for Java 8 or better will be just fine for your use case here. I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and we're going to go ahead and build a simple application. And we're going to kind of take a look at you know, what Spring Boot is doing here. So let's first of all move this code page out of the way. I don't want to use Kotlin right now, so I'm going to move this into a separate package called K for Kotlin. And then we'll create a new package called J. So it'll be JK. Okay? And J will be short for Java. All right? There we are. So new class. I'm going to call this Beans Applications as well. Okay. And it's just a regular Spring Boot application. So at Spring Boot application, you can tell it's a Spring Boot application because it says, well, it says Spring Boot application. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a public static void main. Whoa. Public static void main string args, and we're going to start the application. So it's going to start up. It's going to inject the, we're going to tell it to start up by looking at the configuration class that we're giving it, and it's going to use these arguments there. And I'm going to reformat the code. Now, this is a Spring Boot application by virtue of the fact that it's got this annotation. This annotation is itself meta-annotated. That is to say, it's annotated with other annotations, one of which is configuration, and another one of which is component scan. These two annotations tell Spring they tell Spring to activate two different ways of discovering the wiring or relationships of our objects. Remember, at the end of the day, Spring is just a big bag of beans. It's a framework that knows about the wiring of your objects, and because it knows about that arrangement and how these things plug together, it can do things on our behalf. It can do things along the seams of the boundaries of these different objects. So at configuration tells Spring that this class can provide bean definitions. So let's suppose I have a object of type customer service, and customer service in turn injects a Mongo client. The Mongo client is a simple object that we're going to use. I don't even care all that much about the Mongo client. I just want to have something to put into my constructor there. This bean is going to be made available thanks to the auto configuration in Spring Boot. Spring Boot is going to start up. It's going to provide objects. It's going to register objects in the application context for us. That's happening behind the scenes. That's actually the third annotation that you see if you look at this. It's called @enable auto configuration. But for our purposes, all we need to know is that because we have Spring Boot starter data reactive MongoDB on the class path, this bean is available, and it'll be provided as a collaborating object for this constructor. So customer service is a bean. I'm using @toString here. This is from Lombok. How many of you know Lombok? Lombok is a compile time annotation processor. This is neither here nor there with respect to the demo for today, but it just makes it easier to generate a toString. And I am nothing if not lazy, so let's just keep that there. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell Spring that I want it to be aware of this customer service. So I'll create a bean provider method like so. This bean provider method is just that. It's a method that injects a Mongo client or stipulates a dependency on that Mongo client, and then use that to new up a new instance of that object. And now, if I wanted to create another bean to inspect that object or to work with it in some way, I could create another bean method. I could say run, and then I just return a new application runner. Now, of course, application runner is a functional interface. It has one method that can be rewritten, or it can be written in terms of a lambda, right? So I don't actually have to do this. I can just replace it with that. In the runner method here, I'm going to tell it to inject my customer service pointer. So CS, there we are. And I just want to print out the customer service bean that comes back. Okay? I'm not doing anything particularly interesting. I'm just demonstrating, two different beans, two different objects that are wired together. So let's go ahead and start that up. I'll take some water. All right. So this is the application. Ever so simple. We have the object here. It's been reflected in the console. That's obviously working. This is one way to make this work, right? I have these two bean definitions, and Spring is explicitly made aware of the arrangement of these two objects. We've told Spring that there is a bean of type customer service, and this is exactly the recipe that was used to create it. We didn't leave anything to chance. We can use for loops and if statements and all that stuff to construct this, right? Another way to tell Spring about the relationship of these objects is to annotate the component itself. I could give it a so-called stereotype annotation. A stereotype annotation, like @component or @service or @rest controller or whatever, tells Spring that this object should be packaged or collected in a package scan. It should look in the packages, find all the beans that have these marker annotations, and then new up default instances of these beans, first by looking at the no argument constructor, and then second by trying to satisfy the dependencies of whatever constructor it can find if it can't find a no argument constructor. So it can see that I've got a constructor. That constructor expects a bean of type Mongo client. It knows it has a pointer or a reference to that Mongo client in the application context somewhere. So it's going to call this constructor instead, since there is no argument constructor. So that'll work as well, right? I'm going to inject that customer service that was provided implicitly now, not explicitly. This bean provider method was explicitly. Now it's implicit, right? Now I'm just letting the arrangement of the wiring, I'm letting Spring infer that by looking at the classes. So there we go. Same result. I have one bean of type customer service, and I have one application runner. Now this is all, I think, very well and good. These are pretty trivial objects. Let's suppose I wanted to use the Spring Web Flux APIs, right? The Spring Web Flux API in Spring Framework 5 has there's two ways you can use it. There's the Spring MVC style REST controller approach, or there's this lambda, this callback approach, right? Like a lot of frameworks. Right? So service response.ok.body, and I'm going to say flux.just hello, not Jello, that's good too though, world, right? String.class. So what I'm saying to the Spring Web Flux runtime is I have a response that I want you to render. It's of type string, and the body, the object that you're going to use to create that body is this publisher here. Now, of course, you can clean this up a lot, right? You can get rid of the server response and so on. So beans application, server response, add on demand static, very nice. Okay, so there's my cleaner functional route, right? It's a one-liner, but I have a method that I've had to create around it. I have a bean annotation, and I have this configuration class. Remember, this Spring Boot application, I could put all these beans in a separate class, and as long as it's got configuration on it, it doesn't matter. As long as it has configuration on it, Spring will find it, assuming you've got component scanning. So if it's in the same package or below, this could have been a separate config class with a separate annotation at configuration. All of that is a bit ceremonious, don't you think? I've got 3 different beans. I've got the router functions, I've got the application runner, and I've got the customer service. This one, I think, makes a lot of sense. I need that state. But these other two, these are lambdas or functional interfaces. They're functions, and yet I have a class and a method just to be able to tell Spring about these lambdas, these functions, right? So there's a new style. There's a programmatic bean definition approach in Spring Framework 5, which lets you kind of mix and match. You get the best of both worlds. So in order to do that, we're gonna sort of opt out of the default configuration, of the default instantiation of our Spring Boot application. We're going to tell Spring how to instantiate our application using a builder, right? So I'm going to say new Spring application builder. We're going to say that we want it to run using these arguments and using these sources, this source class, in this case, beans application.class. And then we're going to provide a initializer. And the initializer is a interface of type application context initializer. So new application context initializer, there we are. And this interface is expecting to inject a type of application context. I want a subtype of configurable application context. It's a generic application context, so I'll change the type parameter there, CTX. And what's happened is I've got now a callback. It's gonna give me this opportunity to configure the application context as it's being created. I can do all sorts of things before the objects have been fully configured and fully contributed to the object graph, before anything has been put into service. So we're kind of in an interesting state here. This application is not running yet. It's not available to handle requests or anything, but we can still mutate the application context. We can still contribute definitions to it. That's what we're going to do. So let's rewrite our existing example here. Let's, first of all, get rid of the component annotation so that the bean is something that we have to register automatically, or explicitly again. So context.registerBean, customer service.class. That's exactly the same thing, right? I don't have to annotate it now. I have the benefit, just like with the Java configuration style with these bean provider methods, I have the benefit of it all being in a single artifact. I can put it in this initializer, although, of course, I could also put it in multiple initializers. It's dynamic as well. I could say if math.random greater than 0.5, then registered, right? If you've ever used Spring Boot, you know about the conditional annotations. These conditional annotations make it so that I can dynamically contribute objects to the object graph. But again, pretty ceremonious. I have a conditional annotation. It, in turn, is meta-annotated with @conditional, which in turn contains a class literal, and that class literal is it references a class that implements condition, and there you have your test. So you've got like 3 or 4 cognitive hops before you can actually have the simple predicate that decides whether that object gets contributed to the object graph. I don't have that hop here, right? It's very simple to say, do or don't, right there, right? So if true, for example, that's our simple test now, then register this bean. All right, so that's one bean. Let's see, what else do we want? I want to register the bean of type application runner. But I don't want to have to, I don't want to have to, I have no application runner. I don't want to have to create a separate standalone class and register it that way. Instead, I want Spring to register the bean for me of a certain type, but I'm going to give it the definition. So here, I have a second parameter of type supplier. This is a Java 8 supplier, right? So the supplier is expecting me to supply a bean of type application runner. So let's do that, new application runner. And there, I can implement the code that I had before. So where's my little application runner? There we are. Put that back in place. All right. So I need to inject this pointer to the customer service. And I can do that a number of different places, all of which are valid. I can return the supplier here. I can say, give me a pointer to the customer service. So context.getBean customer service.class, right? So I can instantiate it outside of the scope of the bean that I'm producing. I can retrieve it outside of the scope of the bean I'm producing. And of course, this is a lambda. That's easy. This becomes a lambda as well. And arguably, this could just be inlined at that point. It almost seems pointless. So there we are. There's the rewritten code. Much simpler. This could be a lambda as well, right? So get rid of that. There we are. See? So now we've got a one-liner to register the application runner, because really all I wanted with that application runner was the side effect. I wanted to call the run method. There's no state. I'm not going to inject it anywhere. I'm not going to use it anywhere. I just want to have this thing get run when the framework gets called. It's a function that I'm telling the framework to call, right? So with this approach, I can treat it as such. It's just a simple, small, lightweight thing that runs outside of most of my logic. And indeed, that whole thing, that whole block, can be written as a lambda. Now, we also have we've got the application runner. We've got the route, the functional route as well. So this, of course, same thing. I can just provide that in a supplier. So I can say ctx.registerBean router function .class, produce that. There we are. So now it's a one-liner to return that. And again, you can mix and match. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I just think it looks very, very clean to do this, right? And you also have some other options here. I can actually introspect the object that's being created here. I can set things on it. So I can provide a bean definition customizer, right? The bean definition customizer is a callback method. There, I'm given a pointer to the bean definition. Before the object is put into service, I can set things like whether it should be an AutoWire candidate, what the factory name should be, whether it should be lazy or not, what the scope is, etc. All these different things I can dynamically change here in this callback while the object is being processed, while it's being created. All right. So in this case, I don't really care about all that, but it's nice. And also, you can inspect those beans that are registered that way as well. Normally, in order to get that kind of visibility, you have to implement what's called a bean factory post-processor, which is an interface that, you can do it, certainly fine. But if you just want to register a bean like this, you want to have access to that, you can do that here. So this works. Let's see. Let's clean this up, collapse it all down a little bit. All right, toString, good. And if I go up here, remove all that, where are we? We have a application with, all right. We have an application with 41 lines of code, a very trivial little application. Sorry, 40 lines of code, 41. Okay, so let's run the application again. Same exact result, right? We got a customer service referencing another bean, and the application's there. If I go to the console, curl http localhost 8080 / what was it, hi? There you go, hello world. So that works. That's the Java approach. That's the Java approach. We can do the same thing in Kotlin. And there, I think this functional approach really starts to shine. So let's comment that out. Spring, I'm going to say, well, first I'll kill this instance here. And we're going to say Spring application builder dot run, and we're going to do the same thing as we did before. So beans application, class Java, sources, sorry, args, this is the thing it's expecting there, args. I'm going to say sources is equal to beans application, class Java, that's this one right here. And we're going to tell it to use an initializer. But for the initializer, we have this nice Kotlin DSL for the beans thing, right? It's ultimately it's the same mechanism, but it's this nice DSL called beans. And therein, I can register beans as I want. So I can say, I want to register a bean. Well, first I want to register a bean of type customer service. So let's go back and do something that's terrible, something you should never, ever do, not even when you're all by yourself, all alone at home, and no one is looking. I'm going to copy and paste some code. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste. We'll have it converted into Kotlin there. There we are. And there's my equivalent Java bean. I'm going to tell Kotlin to register this bean for me. And that's it. Notice that I don't have to provide a class literal or anything like that. I don't have to say class literal customer service class Java. And the reason I don't have to do that is because of something called a macro function in Kotlin. Kotlin basically writes the code to reify this type. Right? At this call site right here, it creates the compiler writes in a pointer to the customer service class, and then writes this code as though I had called it with that class literal. The benefit is that you get the effect of reification of generic parameters at runtime without actually having it, because the JVM fundamentally doesn't have it, right? So there's one bean. What about the other one? We have a application runner, right? Let's go ahead and register the application runner. So bean. In this case, I'll just provide an application runner like so. And what I want to do is I want to get access to that other reference, that customer service reference, don't I? So I say ref customer service, and there we are. And again, it's using reification. This is actually type safe. It's actually a pointer to customer service. I don't have to specify the type, but it is, right? I can say cs dot whatever, Mongo client, and I can print out the information I get there. So toString, or just go a step further, inline it, right? So there's that. And what about the functional reactive endpoint? Well, there's a nice type-safe DSL in Kotlin as well for that. So while I could do something like this, all I want to do is just return a route. So I'll say router and get hi server response.ok.body, and we're going to create a response. So val message equals flux.just hello world. All right, and I'm going to pass that into this. And you see that? See what I just imported? I was just prompted to import. That is an extension method. So by default in the Java API, you don't see this extra method, this variant that doesn't require the class literal, right? That's because of reification. So now that I've got that, I can just inline that. And there's my rewritten Kotlin version of the same code base, same application. And it's all just in one place, very, very svelte. I like it as well. OK, so let's see if that one works. Let's run it. Whoa. Now you can do all sorts of other things here. You can actually say, I want a profile, right? I want this to be in the foo profile and then provide the beans inside that, for example. You can do other things with the DSL. You know, all you have to do is you can interact with the environment. You can provide beans inside of a certain profile. You can look up other references. You can do all sorts of things. But for our purposes here now, it suffices to understand that you have this nice DSL that works brilliantly in Java, and I think it's even nicer in Kotlin. So there we go. There's the same application. Let's hit the endpoint one more time. There we are, hello world again, right? Or hello world the second time. So with that, my friends, we've looked ever so briefly at, well, different ways of registering beans with Spring. Is it going to change the world? I hope so. It's a small thing, but it's a wonderful thing. This is a natural fit, I think, in the sort of functional reactive world of Spring Web Flux. It's a natural fit in Kotlin, where you have this very sort of functional language. And just think, look at this. See all that? All these curly brackets? And yeah, all this matching? Because of what we've done here, we have brought the joys of parenthesis counting and matching of Lisp to Kotlin and to you. So there's that. That's cool. All right, my friends, thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Appreciate your time, and have a great show.